everyone. I'm going to walk you through Zscaler Private Service Edge, Zscaler App Connectors, Zscaler Client Connectors in a no default route explicit proxy setup. So that's what I want to do. So considering some customers have a no default route environment, meaning there's no internet default route. Users are not able to resolve the internet, no internet DNS, and even if they could and put in a static route to the next top firewall, the firewall is denying access to the internet. So how do we solve this? So we've added proxy support into a number of different functions: the service edge, the app connector, the client connector. Needs a little bit of configuration to get working. So on the firewall, you'll see on the arrows here, things are pointing to the firewall. They're pointing to a NAT address, or the global proxy IP address that Zscaler's created. These global IP addresses don't overlap with anything. Essentially, you throw them into a GRE tunnel, and the Zen at the other end will just intercept it because it's part of the cloud. I'm using ZIA in this demo, but it could be any on-premise proxy. It could just be a squid box the customer has on their network, but obviously they're then responsible for the scalability and everything of that. And of course, we don't want to send all the customer's ZPA traffic through ZIA. If a customer's got a gigabit of private traffic, we don't want a gigabit of traffic going through ZIA and creating a bottleneck there just to send it straight to ZPA. So this is not an optimal deployment, but the point on doing it this way is that the signaling, as it were, between client connector and ZPA, and the app connector and ZPA, and the private service edge and ZPA can go through those tunnels, but the client can then connect to the private service edge. The app connector can connect to the private service edge directly, and therefore ZIA is out of the loop for the data channel. It's only in the loop for the control channel. So we get this set up. We're going to use WPAD in terms of the client configuration, and we're going to use client connector profiles, app profiles to point to those things, and then I'll run through the configuration and everything for the app connector, service edge, and everything. Okay, so let's come out of the slideshow. And first off, what I'll do is I'll just jump in. I've got a that's interesting. My router doesn't seem to be responding, but that's probably something to do with my DNS. Here's the router. Basically, what I've got on here. Here is the global VIP. I've got a GRE tunnel. GRE tunnel that's pointing to, actually telling me where it's pointed to, but it's pointing to the London node. It's point-to-point tunnel with these IPs, and it's basically saying, if I receive a request to this IP address, which is the global VIP, stick it into the GRE tunnel, node at the other end will connect to it. So I'm using the global VIP as the explicit proxy. Let's jump into another window, and somewhere up here in my history, just to start from first principles. So I'm going to install Zscaler Client Connector with the user domain and the cloud name. Before I do that, I will show you on my network what I have configured. Interestingly, I should have configured is auto proxy discovery. And what auto proxy discovery is going to do is go to wpad.welshgeek.net, wpad.dat and get the WPAD file. And this basically says things that are plain host names, so short names, or anything that ends at wellskeep.net, send it direct. It's got zscaler.com, zscaler.net, zscaler2, the update URLs for Zscaler client and ZDX. It needs a bypass in here also for the IP address to get to the private service edge. And quite specifically, the client connector does a lookup for whether or not it can resolve a host 1, 2, 3, 4. And we don't want that. We're basically blocking that, which basically tells client connector, consider yourself to go through a proxy. And then everything else. So for those things, it says go to the proxy, and that would then be the reason why my router wasn't coming up, which is there. So we'll jump into the router because obviously I had the proxy config and instead of the WPAD. So if we jump into the router, just to show you the firewall rules that I've got set up on here. Routing a firewall. My firewall is basically saying my client, which is .51, this machine I'm working on, is allowed to go to that IP address, which is the global VIP, and denied access to everything else. The private service edge, which is .53, can go to the global VIP, but denied access to everything else. The app connector can go to, which is .132, can go to the global VIP, and it's denied access to everything else. So basically, so I don't break a whole bunch of other things on my network. So that's the setup there. And if I come here, if I go ping www.zscaler.com, I'll get no response because I've broken my DNS as well. So I've got no ability to route to the internet. Firewall is blocking everything except for the global VIP, and I can't resolve the internet. If I do a trace route, I probably trace route will probably fail anyway. 8.8.8.8. There you go. Just drop to the firewall. So we don't have any connectivity there at all. So we'll go ahead. We'll install Zscaler Client Connector. We've got it locally, and Client Connector. When it takes that, it will auto log on. And what it's going to do is it's going to read that the WPAD, and the WPAD is going to set it to go to the proxy. The proxy is the global VIP. We'll jump in here and open it up. It's going to go to the global VIP, it'll talk to the cloud, it'll pull out the configuration, it'll redirect to my SAML server. My SAML server will do transparent single sign-on for ZIA and ZPA, and then I will be connected and I'll be able to go to the internet and my private applications. So we'll wait for this to finish. And we will open up here, and we will see what it's doing. I don't know why it thinks I'm administrator, but anyway, doesn't make a great deal of difference. Let's wait for this to finish connecting. Just whilst it's doing that, it's pulled down an app profile called NDR, no default route. It's got the app version. We should see internet security is connected. It says there that the server is the global VIP. It's the DTLS tunnel that's connecting through there. Private access seems to be taking a little bit longer. Digital experience is connecting. It's connecting to its server there. Again, explicitly, in that case, it's going through ZIA as far as I know. And we seem to be just taking a little bit longer to connect to private service edge for private access, but we'll come back to that in a second. What I'll do is I'll jump into the admin console whilst that connects and kind of show you the way that setup looks. So if I come to my app profiles, I'm on a Mac here, so we'll come here, and here's my no default route. And we're using a custom pack file for the application pack. So if we go and take a look at that, again, that app pack file is basically saying talk to the global proxy. So that's my zTunnel 2.0 is gonna be tunneling to that host. And we're saying tunnel the internal connector traffic, and I want to cache the system proxy because I want to make sure that that is still being applied. When we look here, we should still have a proxy configured because the proxy is still there for all of the other communications. So that's still going to be there for certain traffic. And I've got my bypasses here for my internal traffic. If we come across to the forwarding profile, I've got a forwarding profile here called no default route. It's using all of the trusted networks that I've got defined. I will show you those. And basically it's saying use zTunnel 2.0 and configure automatically detect settings for my system proxy. And then doesn't really make a great deal of difference, but we're using tunnel mode for all of those settings there. My trusted networks, these are essentially the same, but it's saying if you can resolve this, then you're on the trusted network, or if you're on router, you're on the trusted network. And so when we then look at the private service edges, the service edge group will say, if you're in one of these two data centers, then you're on this network, you should use the private service edge. So that flows down to Zscaler client connector. Let's jump back over to the client connector. And for some reason, as are all best demos, it hasn't done what I wanted it to do first time. We'll just restart the service and I'll carry on with the rest of this. So on the service edge, it's already enrolled, but I've got two files here, proxy and proxy bypass. If I cat proxy, it just basically points to that global VIP. If I cat proxy hyphen bypass, I've explicitly called out that 132, which is the app connector, should be bypassed for its if it needs to connect to that. But that's not necessarily required for the app connector. For the service edge. For the app connector, it is absolutely necessary because the app connector needs to know, how do I get to the internet? So it's going to go, okay, well, I go through the global proxy again. But when that says to it, hey, you're going to need to establish a data channel to this private service edge. If you don't have a bypass in there, it'll try and go through the proxy to get to the private service edge. So you need those bypasses in your proxy configuration for your app connector, so that when the app connector tries to establish certain connections, that it doesn't try to go through the proxy. So that's why we've got that in there, and I've explicitly called out the private service edge here. Let's just come back here and see if this thing's decided to connect. And I know exactly why. It's because it thinks I'm administrator. So let's sign out of here. And we'll come back in. Administrator being a specific account. When it comes to the fact that I've got SCIM enabled, that's why ZPA won't allow it to connect, because SCIM is not syncing an account called administrator. I love my demos. But anyway, it'll explain why it doesn't connect, and I should have dealt with that before I started the demo. But at least give you another hint. If you've got skim configured and your skim hasn't synchronized properly, then or it hasn't synchronized the accounts that you're logging in as, you will have a problem with private access connecting. So we'll give this a second to finish connecting. We'll just double check because I know that when you sign out sometimes, no, okay. Internet security is on, digital experience is still connecting. There we go, private access is enabled. This is exactly what we want. So my DTLS tunnel, private access is connected, so I know it was because of my user account, because of SCIM. We're going via 53, which is my private service edge. Digital experience is connected as well. So now if I do something like klist, we can go back in here and do kdestroy minus a, and I know that my KDC is dc3.welshgeek.net, so it's now going through ZPA, and I do a kinit. So I've now got my Kerberos ticket via ZPA. If I come into my diagnostics here, and it's 1601, so it's just going to take a short second or two to get those transactions through. Should have probably used live logs, but we'll just refresh these logs a second. There we go. 1601, here is my port 88 connection for Kerberos. Let's zoom in here a little bit so we can see that we went through the service edge, through that app connector. Here are our connections. This is the IP address on the app connector. And if we come over to the app connector, well, this we do netstat minus an, grep 192.161.132. 132 is the app connector. I'm on the service edge. Here we've got the control channel. Well, no, there's the control channel. It's a lower port, and here is the data channel for the higher port. And then obviously everything that I've been doing after that, if I go to 888.com, I've got it's because of my DNS resolution. What I actually want to do is have my DNS coming through this as well. So if I change this so that my DNS domain inclusions start. Basically, you want your DNS to be coming through through Zscaler Internet Access, but all of my other traffic, for example, 888.com is now resolving via ZIA, and if I go to cat.com, even though I couldn't resolve Internet DNS before, and I'm now using ztunnel 2.0, I can now force all of my DNS traffic through Zscaler Internet Access. It is actually the Zen that is then resolving the DNS for me. So now I've solved the problem of being able to use my private service edge, everything stays locally, and for Zscaler Internet Access, I'm using my tunnel mode, and now the clients can start resolving Internet DNS. Now, if customers wanted to do this, as we've seen, as they start to look at O365 and stuff like that, where they've got no Internet DNS, they've got no Internet routes, then we can solve this by sending traffic through us, and actually we become the resolver by saying, send the DNS traffic to us and bypass your local addresses. So you don't need to start advertising the internet into them. And they could do this just for example, the Microsoft or the Teams URLs and things like that. So there we go. Started off with talking about private service edge, but obviously also covered Zscaler Internet Access, routing, and Internet DNS resolution. Hope that was useful. Mark at zscaler.com.